Okay, boys and girls, we are talking about text structure. Text structure means that authors choose text structures that best fit their purposes for writing a text. So they format or they choose the way they're going to write their text, and it has to fit the text that they're writing. So there are 4 different text structures. There's author's purpose, or there's comparison and contrast. That's where an author will take something and they will compare and contrast it to something. That structure helps authors describe how things are alike and different. And they'll use words like but, both, however, and. So they'll show how something is like something and different from something. Then there's cause and effect. Why does the author do that? That text structure helps authors explain what happened and why it happened. So some transition words or important words you can look for, and that would be because, so, in order to, as a result. So some authors will use cause and effect. Another text structure would be sequence. Sequence. The author uses text structure and sequence because it explains events in the order that they happened. And some important words to look for then would be before, first, next, last. There might be words with dates in them. Those would show you that there's text, that there's sequence words, or sequence is a text structure. Then we have problem and solution. The problem-solution text structure helps authors explain how a problem is solved. They might use words like problem, they might use the word solution, which is a tip-off, difficulty, the answer is. So those are all different types of text structure. Now, the text structure that we are looking at this week would be sequence. Sequence. The text structure we're looking at this week is sequence. The U.S. Constitution story dealt with sequence. There was a sequence to that story. Things happened in a time order. Now we are going to be reading a story about somebody named Henry Ford. Does his name sound familiar to you at all? Have you ever heard of Henry Ford? Does the name Ford, or does that word Ford sound familiar to you? What's sound familiar about that word? Beckett?
It's like kind of like a car brand.
It's a car brand. And you're going to find out why Henry Ford is so important and what he has to do with the car brand. Because he has a lot to do with the car brand. Yes?
He invented the car brand.
He invented that car brand. Okay? That's who the car brand is named after. So we're going to read about Henry Ford. And we are going to be looking at this story, at this informational text, because it has to do with sequence. Sequence is very important. It is the text structure that was used in the U.S. Constitution. It's the text structure that we are going to see used in this story, in this informational text about Henry Ford. So let's look at our story, our informational text about Henry Ford. So let's look here. It says Henry Ford founded the Ford Motor Company in 1901. He had worked as an engineer designing experimental motors for the previous 8 years. The company had some early problems. In 1903, they needed more money. They brought some new people into the company who supplied some money for testing and researching new engines. Henry Ford spent the next few years designing the car that would change America and the automobile industry forever. Up until 1908, cars were very expensive. Each car had to be built by hand, one at a time. Due to this, only upper-class citizens could afford cars. Henry Ford wanted to design and produce something that was much more affordable to everyone. The Ford Company released the Model T in October of 1908. The Model T was built very inexpensively. The low cost and the high quality meant that it sold extremely well. Henry Ford was the first person to set up independent car dealerships around the country. This led him to sell his cars to a wide variety of people. In 1913, Ford introduced the assembly belt into his factories and sales skyrocketed. This helped more cars to be built in less time. The belts could move them through the factories. In 1918, when the Model T was just 10 years old, it made up half of all the cars that were owned in America. At the end of 1918, Henry Ford retired. He turned over control of the company to his son. Okay? So boys and girls, Henry Ford was very influential in the car industry. Is the Ford Motor Company still around?
Yeah.
Yes. How many people's families might have a Ford car? I do. Okay. So Ford is still a big company today. Ford cars, Ford trucks, still on the road today. And he is the one who revolutionized the car making. He revolutionized car making. So, do you see anything in here that lets you know that sequence is an important structure, text structure in here? What gives you that tip off? Yes.
The dates like 1901, and then they go 1903, and then they go to 1908, and then the
Yeah, we see all these dates. In here we see 1901, we see 1903, we see 1908, 1913, 1918. We see 1908, we see 1918 in here. I think we see 1913, we see 1918 twice. You know what would be a good idea? For you to highlight that. Every time you see a date, highlight it in here. Use your highlighter to highlight. If you need a highlighter, come get it. So let's highlight all those important dates. So we have our dates highlighted that have to do with Henry Ford. So that lets us know that sequence of events are in our story. So we've highlighted a bunch of dates. Because they did them in order, didn't they? It's all in order. That's the sequence. Okay? Now we have some questions. We have some questions about Henry Ford and what happened here. So let's answer our questions. Your question is on the back. Now you're going to have to go back and forth, but that's okay. You can do that. It said, what happened to the Ford Motor Company in 1903? What happened in 1903 to the Ford Motor Company? Brody? They needed more money, so what did they do to get that money? Mikey?
They brought some new people into the company.
And what did they need those people for? Because this is what's so important. Because this really helped the company. Lauren?
They brought some new people into the company who supplied some money for testing and researching new engines.
Yes, that is so important. So let's write that. So we will write here. We'll say they brought new people in who supplied money for the testing. And researching. Of new engines. Okay, now, what happened after he introduced the assembly belt? Now, boys and girls, when we're talking about an assembly belt, we're not talking about the thing that holds up your pants, right? We're talking about, before they were talking about how a car was built by one person. One person would build one car. So it would take a long time for one person to build a car. He made it so it went on an assembly belt. And that's how cars are built today. So one person has a job and one person will put in like a seat. And then the car moves on the assembly belt and it goes to the next person whose job it is to put in the bolts on the tires. So that makes it much faster. If one person has just one job to do one thing, that's all they do. And then the car just moves on the assembly belt and one person does one thing, and so one thing gets installed and then they just whip those cars through. A lot of products go on an assembly belt. And it's much faster to do it that way than just one person putting together a whole car by themselves. That takes a long time. So now the car is on the assembly belt, right? So you have a lot of, it was probably men, all on the assembly belt, and the first guy is putting on the, I don't know, the bumper. The next guy is adding this. The next guy is doing that. And so he's adding bumper, 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 bumper. The next guy's steering wheel, you know, so it's going, you know, things are happening faster. So I want you to look in the story and tell me what is happening. Read what it says. What do you think happens? Are you looking in your story? So tell me what happens because of the assembly belt, or the assembly line, the assembly belt. Sophie?
All the cars got built quicker.
The cars get built faster, yes, quicker. And so because the cars are made faster, what could they do? Beckett?
They could make more money.
They could, yes, sales skyrocketed, and what else could happen? Yes.
They can like make more. They can make like more cars and like they can make more cars and then people might want them and stuff.
Are they as expensive as they were before? Because cars used to be so expensive, only wealthy people could afford them. Read it, does it say? What happens to the price of the car? Yes?
It goes like a little bit lower.
It goes lower, it goes quite a bit lower. More people can afford the cars, boys and girls. So now let's say more cars could be made faster. This meant they could sell them less money and sales skyrocketed because more people can afford them. So they're making more money than anything now. So even though it sounds like, oh, now they're selling them for less, they'd be making less money, but they're selling even more cars because more people can buy them. Yes.
But if it's more money and like two people buy them, you still don't get a lot of money. But if there's less money and a lot of people buy it, you'll have a lot more money than you used
Yes,
to
you'll have a lot more money because a lot more people are buying them. That's right. A lot more people are buying cars. Because you're going to sell thousands more cars than if two people buy a car. Demand grows. Number 3, what changes did the company undergo in 1918? Amelia? You highlighted it, so you should be able to find 1918.
When the Model T was just 10 years old, it made up half of all the cars that were owned in America.
Okay, so the Model T makes up half of all the cars in America. What else happened? What else significant event? I'm looking for another significant event.
At the end of 1918, Henry Ford retired.
Yes, Henry Ford retired. But can you imagine? Half the cars, more than half the cars on the, it made up half the cars on the road. Henry Ford retired. Now, boys and girls, what did Henry Ford do before starting the Ford Motor Company? What was his job before then, Sophia?
He worked as an engineer.
He was,
Experimental motors for 8 years.
that's right, he was an engineer.
Are we on number 3 or 4? 3.
We're on number 4.
3 was Henry Ford retired.
It says number 4. He was an engineer. Boys and girls, a lot of engineers work for car companies. A lot of engineers work for car companies. There's a lot of engineering that goes into making a car. Yes.
Can I quickly address you?
We have one more question. Okay, number 5. Now, describe the connections within the text. How is all this information connected to each other? How are they connecting it? How is it being connected? How do they connect it? What do you think, Beckett?
Because it goes in order, like 1901, 1903, and then 1908, and then 1913, and 1918.
Yeah, so they're using like chronological order. So they're putting it in, we call that chronological order. So that's like a sequence. So each event is connected to the next as a sequence. Very good. So let's write that. So the events are written in chronological order. event is connected to the next as a sequence. How interesting was that?
And very interesting.